Welcome to the Westminster News Podcast, your alternative to the mainstream media.
Well, hello guys, and welcome to another edition of the Westminster News Podcast. Michael Heaver here, joined by a very special guest, Adam Willmott from Leave.EU. Adam, how are you doing, mate?
Not too bad, Michael. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. I'm good. You know, I wanted to. I know that you wanted to have a chat, and you know, one of the really interesting things about what's happened in terms of politics and society overall is obviously the reach with the internet. It's changed the game, so to speak. And Leave.EU, I mean, really, the numbers that you guys get are really phenomenal. I was wondering, just to start off with, if you could sort of give people an idea of the size of the reach of Leave.EU online now.
Yeah, I mean, regularly we reach over 1 million people a day on Facebook, which is just a crazy number to think about. We get 12.4 million impressions just this month alone on Twitter, with huge reach. Sort of posts average over 1,000 retweets. So yeah, we have a massive reach. We have nearly 1 million followers on Facebook now, nearly 300,000 on Twitter. And yeah, it's a really special company to work for because of that reach.
Yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal reach. And as I said, it shows you now with the internet, the way that you can sort of bypass the mainstream media, etc. And obviously that's what I'm doing with Westminster in this show. And by the way, guys, a big thanks to those of you that are supporting the show over at westminster.club. You get these shows nice and early for your support. But Adam, I know you wanted to ask me a few things. So, I mean, what's your overall view at the moment in terms of where we are on Brexit?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of negotiations lately with very little success. I think the mainstream media coverage has actually been away from Brexit at the moment on issues like obviously COVID-19, and the EU stuff has kind of taken a back seat, but it's still there, it's still going on. Both sides have these red lines. I mean, I don't think we can afford to sell out our fishing rights. There's several red lines we've got, and it doesn't seem like we're going to come to an agreement with the EU. I'd be interested to know what you thought of that.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, there were reports today that the government, some ministers in the government are sort of accepting the fact that there may not be a deal. And I'll tell you this, during my time as an MEP, I was obviously an MEP for the Brexit Party briefly as we left the EU. What's very clear, and what they repeatedly were keen on emphasising in the EU, Michel Barnier, was something called the level playing field. Now, what that is, I mean, that's a massive deal to the EU for this reason, because what it does on things like state aid is it seeks to stop Brexit competitive advantage. So essentially, it wants to shackle the UK to some EU rules to stop the UK gaining competitive advantage, as I say, on areas like state aid. And that really is one of the big sticking points with the EU. You'll also see on fisheries, they're very keen, of course, to maintain something similar to what we've got at the moment. You know, and what we've got at the moment, of course, is something which has pretty much decimated the British fishing industry in the most disgraceful way. But it's very good for some other foreign fishermen. So that's another point there. But I do think, look, at the end of the day, something that's positive is that David Frost, Boris's man in Brussels, and you know he's got the nickname with me now, Frosty the No Man. He's saying all the right things, and if you compare that and the government that we've got at the moment on Brexit to Theresa May and Ollie Robbins, I mean, good God, do you remember the backstop? That trap that we were going to give billions and billions and billions of pounds for to effectively give the EU a veto. So look, we've made progress. We've obviously left. The government have said time and time again they're going to end the transition period. It's not going to be extended at the end of this year. And I just think the government need to hold firm. And look, and if we do need to walk away without a deal, I think the British people will be fully behind that, because it's, you know, time and time again, whether people like it or not, when it comes to elections, when we talk about the European election or the general election, of course, the referendum itself, it's shown that there is a pro-Brexit majority in this country who simply do not want to be told by the EU what we can and can't do. I mean, it would be absolutely ridiculous, wouldn't it, if having left the EU, we still signed up to something whereby, as I said, on an area like state aid, oh, well, we can't do that because we've signed up to EU rules on it. That can't be allowed to happen.
Yeah, I think you've hit on a key point there. It's very good now that we have David Frost in charge of negotiations and someone who isn't just a yes man and trying to appease the EU, someone who defends the red lines we've got, like you say, on fisheries, the level playing field. This is not what the British people voted for in any way. So it's absolutely right that we have someone defending that. And if we have to leave on a no deal, I think there is a mandate for that because the British people have continuously voted for Brexit.
Absolutely. Look, the main point here is the fundamental point is we cannot have another election where whether it's the Conservative Party or the Labour Party or whoever says, oh, no, we can't have that in our manifesto, or we can't do that because of EU rules that we signed up to. That, under no circumstances, can be allowed to happen. We want a trade deal, and we don't want further political control from the EU. But I know that you've got, Adam, a number of questions for me, so I'm ready to roll. Like a coiled spring, hit me.
Nice one. The next thing I'd be quite interested to get your take on is obviously the Russia report came out yesterday. It found no evidence of Russian involvement in the referendum. And my question to you is, should the orchestrators of this, let's call it what it is, a conspiracy theory, should they apologise to the people they've accused?
Oh, well, they're never going to apologise, are they? Of course they should. Of course they should. But I think, and we saw this in America as well. There was a concerted, clear attempt to delegitimise the public vote on Brexit. And I must say, I did a video on YouTube, on the Westminster YouTube yesterday on this. I think one of the things that's almost been slightly overlooked and played down is if you look at the degree to which chunks of the mainstream media really pushed this story. I mean, it was ridiculous. I mean, I think Channel 4 News at one stage were running the Banks files. Newsnight lost the plot. And it comes down to this. A lot of journalists now, not all of them, but a lot of journalists now, particularly ones on TV, on Brexit, clearly didn't like the result and saw their role as to not inform, but to influence people to try and stop Brexit and ultimately to try and overturn it. And again, we saw this in America with Trump. These Russian conspiracy theories weren't just being put out from sort of random cranks on Twitter. Some major journalists were pushing this claptrap for years. And all I would say is it underlines why alternative outlets like Westminster are growing and why we're so important. Because at the end of the day, a lot of journalists now, I'm afraid, are, and of course they won't ever admit this, but effectively in my eyes are activists seeking to shape what you think. I mean, as I said, the headline, people will remember this, that sort of headline coverage that some of these conspiracy theories got on TV was totally and utterly ridiculous. And of course, coupled with social media now, where you have people, we've got this ridiculous game, haven't we? Where we see journalists basically pumping out news stories that they want to highlight, that push a certain political agenda, etc., and then and making clearly partisan comments, overwhelmingly anti-conservative, anti-government, anti-Boris, anti-Brexit. You know what I'm talking about. It's the usual suspects that you can see do it day after day. But when they do that and then they go on TV, we have this game where they go on TV and then they expect us to take them seriously as neutral. I mean, the whole thing's it's a circus. And again, it's why you're going to see alternative media keep growing, hopefully.
I think you're absolutely right. I think it's another example of people who can't accept the Brexit result, trying to blame the Brexit result on Russia and interference and all these kind of things.
Yeah,
it's just a failure to accept that the EU is the reason people voted to leave.
But also, Adam, I mean, I think that there are unfortunately, there are a section of people who nearly all live in London and are nearly all pretty well off. And the problem is they think that they are the lives that they lead are reflective of the country at large. What they don't realise is they're actually in a very fringe. I mean, look at the EU referendum vote, right? London was an anomaly. Okay, it's a cultural and political anomaly. It's the rest of the country it thinks and votes often differently to London, and I think the problem they've got is they don't actually really understand the country they live in as much as mainstream public opinion. I talked the other day, just to give you one example, the death penalty. The death penalty is something that nearly no, I don't think a single mainstream media journalist is in favour of. Very few MPs are. It's something that is probably, on mainstream media, TV, and in newspapers would be seen as a very extreme thing. Well, there was a poll done, I think it was last week, Redfield and Wilton poll, that showed 51% in favour and only about a quarter opposing. Now, regardless of what you think of the issue itself, the gap between British public opinion, majority British public opinion, and the commentariat, I don't think has ever been as separated as it is today. And it's why vote after vote after vote, when the establishment lose, they think, oh no, that can't possibly have happened. Everyone thinks like I do at the posh dinner parties in London. So those silly people must have been manipulated, or they just won't accept the fact that in this country, Brits overwhelmingly wanted to leave the EU, still do want to leave the EU, or are glad that we have left the EU, and want things like border controls brought in. They don't want open borders. And I think it's, the Russia conspiracy theories and things like that almost get used as a coping mechanism. Oh, well, no, the vote was rigged. It wasn't fair. That's sort of the comfort blanket they give themselves, because they just won't accept the fact that they lost the public vote.
And talking of border controls there, obviously we've seen floods of migrants coming over the channel recently. What more do you think the government should be doing about that to try and stop this invasion that's taking place?
Well, look, I mean, the numbers, and again, Westminster, we've been reporting on this day after day. Very few other people seem to even be bothering doing it. I'll just give the up-to-date figures. In the last Sunday to Sunday period, there were at least 35 migrant boats carrying 455 people that made it across in 1 week, in 7 days. Yesterday, Tuesday, another 13 migrant boats and 159 people crossed the channel in 1 day. This is an issue that is getting worse, right? It's not getting better, it's getting worse. And the only way this is going to be stopped is very simple. When people that are coming, trying to get to Britain illegally, know that there's no point in doing it because they won't be allowed to stay, that's when it will stop. If that doesn't happen, this is going to continue. It's going to get worse. It's dangerous. It's wrong. It shouldn't be happening. And by the way, we've given the French quite a hefty chunk of cash to crack down on this. And yes, they are stopping some, but these numbers are absolutely eye-watering. As I said, 455 people across in 1 week, and yesterday alone, we've just seen another 159. It's absolutely ridiculous. And to be fair, I mean, Home Secretary Priti Patel, she says the right things, but we need to start seeing some delivery now, because as I said, these numbers are getting worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we've seen strong words from Priti, but I think the British people are demanding action on this. And I agree, Westminster's been at the forefront of letting the people know just how big this issue is. It really is a massive issue.
Well, what's interesting, Adam, is that you get some media outlets. I know Sky News did a piece, and they sort of, they'll go down there for a day and they'll do a day report. Oh, this happened today. There were boats coming over. But what that sort of does, which isn't accurate, is it sort of almost gives the impression that this is like a sporadic thing that happens every once in a while. That's not true. This has almost now become a daily issue. Near enough, more days than not now, because I get the numbers off the Home Office. This is happening. This is happening more and more and more. And yeah, look, listen, Westminster and myself are going to stay absolutely on top of this, because it's an issue that needs dealing with, and it's another issue that I think the British people do care about. I mean, for God's sake, you don't know who these people are, as one issue. Second issue is that if you continue this way, it sends out a message for more people to try and get into the UK illegally, and it needs dealing with. It needs dealing with in a similar way to what the Aussies did, which is they quite simply said, there's no point you trying to come over illegally, because you won't be allowed to stay. And as soon as unless we start implementing that, and I'm afraid the statistics I've seen, the numbers that are actually of people that come to the UK legally who are not allowed to stay is pathetically low. And I'm afraid, and as you can imagine, the more people that come across illegally and successfully, it simply encourages more.
Absolutely. And whilst we're on that topic of criminality, recently we've been seeing rioting in Shepherd's Bush, Hackney, Brixton, all across London. We've seen a kind of mixed police response to this. Often they've backed away. I think recently in Hackney they were a little bit more proactive. What do you think the police should be doing about this? Should they take a real hard approach on rioting?
I think we need to see a tougher approach. Again, I mean, I'm amazed that sometimes you see these videos on social media that I try and highlight of there being, serious disorder, and you turn on the TV and it's as if it never happened. I mean, it's quite astonishing actually. But look, law and order in this country is on its arse. Let me just give you some statistics. I definitely think people want to see a tougher approach, but I think when it comes to sentencing, I think our sentencing is pathetic when it comes to the sentences that criminals get. The proportion, I mean, this was, again, I'm amazed this isn't a bigger story. I reported this on Westminster the other day on 17th of July. The proportion of crimes in England and Wales that now result in charges has fallen to a record low 7%, i.e. 93% of recorded crimes don't result in any criminal charges. That's down. It was 16% in 2015. Now it's 7%. 43% of cases, the police forces are closing without a suspect being identified. When it comes to knife crime, it's up 6% from the previous year, 7% increase in London. London saw knife homicides from knife crimes increase by 28%. And the latest figure is 51% higher than when comparable records began in 2011. Now, I think this is a pretty serious story. The level of crime surging, the number of crimes resulting in charges. But again, it seems to me that there just isn't that much media interest at the moment. And I think, ultimately we need to get far, far tougher when it comes to law and order. I'm sorry. We need to start having, I saw the other day, by the way, there was even a stabbing in Thorpe Park, in theme parks. Who's taken a knife to a theme park, for Christ's sake? And it's very simple. What I would do with this is I would say anyone carrying if you're caught with any sort of weapon, knife, gun, whatever, I think you should be looking at 5-year minimum prison sentence. I mean, at the moment, I've seen cases where they get, people get slapped on the wrist. These guys running around with knives.
So what you're saying is we not only need tougher policing on the streets, but we need tougher action in the courts, tougher sentencing. And that's the only way we're going to lead to people not carrying knives and not committing these vile crimes.
Yep, absolutely. And again, you see very few people saying that, but I think if you brought in a mandatory prison sentence for anyone carrying any weapon, people would soon get the message, but we don't. And I'm afraid I've looked into cases, as I said, where people have been caught in possession of dangerous weapons. They don't even get put in prison. They just get given a slap on the wrist. And, what sort of deterrent is that? It's pathetic. We are, I'm telling you now, on law and order in this country at the moment, we are not just weak, we're dangerously weak. And what I mean by that is that we're so weak, it actually emboldens criminals. If you're running around with a knife and you're pretty confident that even if you get caught a couple of times, or certainly if you only get caught once, you're not even going to get put in prison, that is not a good message to be sending out.
And while we're on this topic of law and order, recently a sort of phenomenon across the country has been the BLM protests. Do you think the police have taken the right approach towards these protests, or do you think we were too soft on them and maybe allowed them to get away with things that other protests wouldn't have been allowed to get away with?
Well, I think it was quite amazing to see in the heart of Westminster, 3 times in 1 week, the police being attacked. And that was astonishing to see that. Again, I tweeted out quite a few of the bits and the videos of what was going on down there, because I was amazed that was allowed to happen. I think what's really sad with the BLM protests is that it's been hijacked by the far left. I mean, just look at just look at the aims of the BLM organisation: get rid of capitalism, abolish the police, etc. It's been documented now. But I think again, and you saw it with the counter protest as well. Police being attacked. When you had the people turn out the week after, the police were getting attacked at all of these rallies, and this is something I'm really focusing on now, because I think when you live in a society where people are emboldened again, where they think they can go around attacking police officers, then you're in a very bad place. Because if someone's willing to attack a police officer, then they're not going to bat an eyelid to attacking someone who isn't a police officer. So I was disturbed, and I think people are sick and tired, frankly, of seeing the police run away. It looked to me like they had been told not to go in heavy for PR purposes. But at the end of the day, I tracked the number of police officers that got injured. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was the amount of police officers that were getting bashed up and injured was completely unacceptable. And we need a far tougher approach on policing and things like this. We shouldn't have a situation where mobs are literally, and people have seen the footage, mobs are literally charging after police officers in London. It's ridiculous.
I think what's interesting with BLM as well is that they've been sort of backed by the mainstream media. They've been backed in sport. We're seeing Premier League players taking the knee. But there's Marxist political aims behind this campaign, isn't there? Do you think a lot of companies and the Premier League were wrong to just blindly back BLM and should have done more research into what the organisation really is and what it stands for?
Yeah, I mean, there is nuance here, because I think that I think a lot of the people and organisations, as you say, that got involved in this, I think they didn't look into the actual organisation behind a lot of this, and I think it's caused some division. Now, obviously, the statement "Black Lives Matter," of course, Black Lives Matter, but what people are saying is, well, actually, who are the people? Huge amounts of money being raised, for instance, on the online fundraiser, and on that fundraising page, it explicitly talks about abolishing police and dismantling capitalism and things like that. And I think people are saying, well, wait a minute, what in terms of and there's this separation, isn't there? There's the organisation, and there's people that obviously want racial justice and equality in our country. And by the way, we're not perfect as a country, of course we're not, but we're pretty bloody good when it comes to these sorts of things. We don't have anything like the prejudice and racism of a lot of other European countries. I do think we need to remember that. We're a country with an amazing, proud history. We're a fairly cohesive society. Of course, we've got challenges and things that need to be dealt with. But I'm a bit sick and tired, frankly, to look at the constant running down and denigration of Britain as if this is the most racist country on earth. Absolute rubbish.
Absolutely right. I think you've made a key point there, that they've hidden this political agenda behind a statement which everyone who is in their right mind would agree with. Of course, Black Lives Matter, but this is an organization. I think it's run in America. It comes around during political campaigns. It backs the Democrats. It's very much political, and they've managed to kind of get that political ideology kind of through the back door behind this statement. And I think a lot of companies should have done their due diligence in that and checked what this is really about. I mean,
one of the most astonishing things for me was when the protest started, the amount of socialist banners in the crowd was astonishing, and this wasn't even mentioned in any of the media coverage. And look, I think, unfortunately, as you say, it's been latched onto by the far left, and it didn't get, in terms of the organisation, certainly it did not get scrutinised by the media. They weren't interested, and as I said, I don't care what protest it is. We cannot keep having a situation where there's videos showing the police having to basically back down from a violent mob. That cannot be allowed to happen. I know there's a lot of anger out there about this. They're wondering, how can this repeatedly have happened? in our capital city.
And another point I'd like to go on to is that obviously during these protests, we've seen large gatherings of people who are not wearing a face mask. And now the government policy seems to be that in shops, people will have to wear a face mask. Do you think this should be advisory rather than compulsory for people to wear these masks? Because the rates of COVID are very low now. Do you
Well,
think this is infringing on people's civil liberties a little bit too much?
well, it's interesting. I mean, I went to a shopping centre yesterday. I mean, hardly anyone was wearing a face mask. So you know, look, ultimately, I can understand the confusion because people would be thinking, well, wait a minute. You know, at the end of the day, we're supposed to be coming out the other side of this, hopefully, and yet you're bringing in this measure now. So I do get the confusion, but at the same time, I do have a degree of sympathy because the science, obviously, and the advice the government will be getting will be changing as we go on. This is a new virus we're having to deal with, and so I think the advice that the government probably be given is changing. But I do understand the confusion. But I'd just like to highlight this statistic. Because, again, this is another thing that went completely under the radar. Yesterday, the Office for National Statistics said that this is the fourth consecutive week that deaths have been below the 5-year average. The number of deaths in care homes, hospitals, and other communal establishments were also fewer than the 5-year average. So, just to give some perspective on where we are, I think that's quite important.
Yeah, I think you've hit on that point that the cases are very low now. So are the government taking the right approach with the face masks and continuing this? And are they playing on people's fears too much? Or is it time to just open up the economy, open up the shops and go back to normal?
Well, look, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I certainly think that the I mean, obviously the government have borrowed masses of money. I think I did a story yesterday where I think the government borrowed about 35 billion just in June alone, and obviously they've had to support people as best they can in unprecedented circumstances. Something I am very worried about is, you know, if we have massive job losses on a huge scale, and so it's striking that balance, isn't it, between trying to keep people as safe as possible, but also being mindful of the fact that we need people to have jobs to go back to. And as I said, you know, I was amazed, Adam. I really was amazed when the pubs were reopening, and I turned on TV, and it was just downbeat. You know, or what if this happens? What if that happens? There's going to be mass carnage on the streets. There's going to be punch-ups. It's opening, you know, and of course none of that happened. And I just thought, blimey, you know, people just want a bit of normality and enjoy their lives after what's been quite a difficult time for a lot of people, most people. And they want to go and have some sense of normality by having a few drinks down the boozer. You know, and I just think I genuinely think some people, you know, they've almost gone sort of hysterical during lockdown and sort of slightly lost the plot. And I just think, you know, people, of course, there's a balancing act, but we need people to be able to, as far as possible and is safe, to go and enjoy themselves a bit. And that was, to me, was a key moment. I just thought, what planet are you guys living on? Just let people go and enjoy themselves and have a bit too much to drink. Blimey. They've not been out in months. You know, the pubs haven't been open for so long. And I certainly went out, enjoyed myself. It wasn't absolutely rammed anywhere. It was all quite responsible and safe. There wasn't mass punch-ups. There wasn't carnage. It was just people going about enjoying their lives a bit.
I've been to the pub and, you know, kept my distance. And yeah, it was safe. Everyone abided by the rules. And I think we need to inject a bit of positivity. We've had a very hard year in terms of COVID, and we are coming through it. And, you know, people should be allowed to. I think it's good for people's mental health as well to get down to the pub, see their friends. And get on with life again. We are going to have to get on with life again.
Yeah, society to some degree in this country seems to become almost extremely, what if this happens, what if that happens? And obviously it's about a balance, but to have hysteria over people going back to pubs, I thought was just ridiculous. And then, by the way, a lot of jobs and things like that depend on local pubs, etc. So, it's actually quite a positive story. It's people being able to actually earn a living again. It's people actually being able to go back to work again. It's people being able to go and enjoy themselves again. Something that is a great thing. So I was just some people just seem determined to be miserable about anything.
The last kind of a question I've got for you is there's a lot of debate at the moment around cancel culture. And we're seeing a lot of figures on the left, notably Owen Jones, denying the existence of cancel culture. Do you think cancel culture does exist? And if it does exist, how do we stamp it out, or how do we stop it being so prevalent in society?
Well, yeah, cancel culture definitely does exist, and I think what's happened is what social media has allowed to happen is that people can get bombed. Relatively few people. Let's say 3,000-4,000 people feel very strongly about something, right? Now, obviously, in terms of the country, that's a tiny, tiny amount. But if they're organised and they mobilise and they're on social media and they start bombarding a company or an individual, whoever, that can feel like, oh, it's millions of people. When actually it isn't. It's a few hardcore, group of people. But what's happening now? Companies and institutions and individuals have got very jumpy, as I said, over being bombarded by, let's say, 2, 3, 4,000 people because it makes them feel like it's the end of the world, etc. I think, frankly, people just need to grow some balls. I mean, with Twitter and things like this, I think on a wider point, what the problem is, people start living live through social media too much, and they start thinking that Twitter is somehow reflective of society. And of course, we know through elections and things like that, it's far, far from that. And I just think when you get these mobilized fanatics, nearly always from the left, with nothing better to do than complain or be offended about something, people just need to tell them to do one, frankly. If you're offended by something or you want to change something, come on then, let's have an election and let's have a public vote. And that's how we determine things. We don't determine things by running around in the street as a mob and tearing down things we don't like. That's not how we run this country, nor should we. And I just think, frankly, I do think we've become a bit snowflake. And as I said, in terms of when you get a barrage of people whinging about something, all too often the company or institution or whatever basically bottles it and bows down. Just tell them to piss off. That's the way I see it. Whenever on Twitter and things like that, and I'm sure you guys see it on Leave, you get hardcore fanatics that criticize everything you do and slag you off and tell you why you're wrong and you're a dickhead or whatever. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. Maybe I'm a bit thick-skinned, I don't know, but I just think people are far too easily swayed now by a few whingers who've got, as I said, got nothing better to do than complain about everything, have got nothing better to do than be miserable about everything. They're a bunch of losers, and just ignore them. Get on with your life.
Well, certainly on Leave.EU, we refuse to kowtow to that kind of outrage mob, because you can't let these people rule your lives. But they have been having success, in that they have some comedy has been cancelled, some comedy programs such as Lives to Britain. Statues are being torn down, so they are, in a way, they are getting their way. So it's important we stop that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think of course, the media side of it. I mean, the BBC. I tell you now. I mean, I've rarely seen a tidal wave of public opinion like you're seeing at the moment against the license fee. I'm telling you now that is going to be a major story over the next decade, because it almost reminds me of sort of the build-up behind Brexit. You can just feel now people are looking at this thinking, in an age of Netflix and Amazon Prime and YouTube and, all the channels we've got on TV, why the hell am I forced to pay for left-wing comedians and all the rest of it? Look, ultimately, I'd be very interested to see if people had the option not to pay the license fee and not receive BBC services. I mean, what percentage of people would actually now pay for the BBC services? Even things like Match of the Day, which of course they pay people huge amounts of money to present. Even that's old hat now, because you obviously with YouTube and Twitter, you get highlights of the footy games very quickly. You don't need to sit around till 10 o'clock plus anymore. And I just think, in terms of the media, we're going to see big changes over the next 10, 20 years. And I hope one of those changes is people continue to support Westminster at westminster.club and visiting the website and listening to this show and subscribing.
Well, it would be fascinating to see the BBC have to try and compete on the free market. And I think people are sick of a lot of the output the BBC are doing. I think a lot of the comedy shows are plagued with people who parade as comedians but are actually activists. I think a lot of the public feel lectured to by the BBC when they just want to enjoy content and have some unbiased content. The statistics show that people do not trust the BBC to deliver unbiased content. So I think maybe the time has come. We have to talk about the funding model, and we have to talk about defunding the BBC.
Well, I think they showed their priorities really when you recently saw, we're slashing regional TV, we're slashing local radio, services that some people do really depend on and value. But we've got 100 million quid for what they call diverse and inclusive content. I mean, if that isn't an example of completely skewed priorities, then I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it couldn't be clearer to me.
Yeah, and as I said, it's podcasts and shows like this that are growing with the support of people. And as I said, at westminster.club, we've got people now supporting us. So it's great. And I think you're going to continue to see alternatives spring up. Bring it on.
And where do you want to take Westminster in the next couple of years? What are your plans with it?
Well, look, I love modern technology. I know it's got a lot of downsides, and I do certainly think that in terms of the internet and social media, you've got to ration yourself on it, and you've got to learn actually that it's not healthy to live your life on it and be on it constantly. But what it also does provide is an amazing way to reach large amounts of people. And so, whether it's YouTube, whether it's this show, podcast, whether it's the website and written pieces, I'm just going to continue as on, and the key story at the moment, an example at the moment is the illegal boat crossings. I mean, this is a story, as I said, that's going on not every single day, but near enough every day. And yet it gets largely ignored. And it's a story that Westminster is going to keep highlighting again and again and again until it stops. Because if we don't, frankly, who will?
So Westminster's there to kind of cover the stories the mainstream media are too afraid to tackle.
Yeah, but look, just stories that I think people care about that for some reason, as I said, another example being the fact that only 7% of crimes now result in charges. I think that's a massive story. Apparently, no one else does, and certainly in terms of if you look at the amount of media coverage it gets. So we're just there to provide a dose of common sense that I think is a bit more in touch with the working man and woman.
Excellent. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today, Michael.
Absolutely, mate. And, Leave.EU obviously has huge reach. Westminster's grown. Hopefully we'll sit down and chat again soon.
Yeah, I hope so. That would be great.
Great stuff. All right, guys. Well, thanks a lot for listening.